In order to allow the edition of these texts, Doma realized that the hieroglyphic font of the French Institute was insufficient and that it would have to be completed. He called upon Geneviève Jourdain-Lamont to create the drawings of the new signs that he collected on the wall of the monuments and to produce hieroglyphic characters of printing in the implementation of a exchange between Doma and Lamont then took place in order to perfect the new science creation of the font. Among other things, the respect of the Egyptian proportions or the details thinness, while guaranteeing the legibility of the sign in future print, bearing in mind that the smallest size was 12 points, in other words, hardly more than 4 millimeters. The Jourdain-Lamont archives files contain about 1,000 drawings at different production stages. Well, it's with these remarkable drawings that my speech will end, hoping that this brief moment will have allowed you to get to know and share all the patrimony and science.
Thank you very much, Jerome. So we can see that, of course, treasure buried in the sand in Egypt, but also treasure buried in the library and archive at Montpellier. So you are welcome to have a look at it when it's possible. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce Bérangère Redon. She is former member of the scientific member of the French Archaeological Institute in Cairo, and she is now researcher of the French National Research Center, CNRS, and she will talk about the surrounding of Lake Marius and the wine fabric found there. So please, Bérangère.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for their invitation to present our recent work in a region that is not so well known to the Egyptologists, located far from the Nile Valley in a margin area. Is in the northwestern 38 kilometers of Alexandria. It is commonly referred to as This margin located where the village on the map of historians. It was an integral of the economic part of Tine is close to the site of Abu Sir, Taposiris Magna, and like the latter, is located on rocky ridge, a ridge of calcareite, a sandstone formed by the consolidation of calcareous sands. Called the Tenia in the Greek sources, this rocky strip of less than a kilometer wide separates the Mediterranean Sea from the Lake Marinus, which gives to the two sides a very important position at the interface between the interior and exterior of the Egyptian territory, the lake being connected to the canopy branch of the Nile by a system of canals. The Tenia was in ancient times dotted with localities whose toponyms are listed by the author of the Stadium and by Strabo in their description of the Mediterranean. Corresponds approximately to the distance between the temple of Taposiris and Comenlubus, which is 2 kilometers as the proof finds. Associated in ancient sources, it is quite natural that the French mission of Taposiris Magna and Plantini has chosen to explore the two sites in parallel. The work of the mission began in 1998 under the direction of Marie-Françoise Boussac, to whom I succeeded in 2018. The field campaigns are held every year, thanks to the support of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the IFAO, and the ISOMA laboratory of the CNRS. And since the two times. Yes. So our work, as well as the work of our few predecessors, has allowed us to understand that Taposiris was probably founded during the reign of Ptolemy IV, even if an earlier but limited occupation is possible under Ptolemy II. The city took off in the early Roman period, when it was equipped with a complex port system on Lake Marinus, which gave the city a major role that it held until the end of antiquity, and even at the beginning of the medieval period. It has been shown recently by the exploration of two very large warehouses in the port. I will not discuss this work today about Taposiris, which is currently being published under the direction of Marie-Françoise Boussac and Joachim Lebon. I will focus today on Plantini, which has been always considered as a small town before being a long time overshadowed by that of Lille, which is much often linked with the land of the pharaohs. Unlike Taposiris, which has two remarkable monuments, the Temple of Osiris and the so-called Tower of the Arabs, the site of Plantini has attracted little attention from modern travelers. However, the ancient site is rich and complex. It is composed of a necropolis with a lot, several tens of isolated tombs and large hypogea of the Alexandrian types, and of a settlement located about 500 meters to the west, which runs on the southern slope of the Tenia, and a horseshoe-shaped comb, which dominates the city to the north, called the Comenus. The site was visited briefly by the scholars of the Expedition d'Egypte at the beginning of the 19th century, and Gratien Lepère left a description that is not very detailed, but which insists on 2 points. Firstly, the density of the remains, and secondly, the particular shape of the site with pyramid-shaped levees and a flattened center. Achille Adriani, director of the Greco-Roman Museum of Alexandria, carried out promising excavation there in 1937, but unfortunately they were quickly interrupted. He opened a few test pits in the Hellenistic city, where he uncovered some very nice architectural elements from Hellenistic houses, and in the Combe. But he concentrated mainly on the necropolis of Plantine, which yielded more impressive remains, notably some hydri of Hadra, incineration, which he transported to the museum. The necropolis was again briefly excavated by the Service of Antiquities in the 60s and 80s without publication, and then extensively by the French mission from 1998 to 2012. This work, which was conducted by Patrice Georges and the late Willy Calot, established that the necropolis has been in operation from the beginning of the Hellenistic period until the beginning of the Roman period. When the French mission began its research program on the city and on the Combe of Plantine in 2012, the aim was to document the settlement where the buried people must have lived some 500 meters to the west. The mission also wanted to understand the nature of the Combe, whose strange shape has intrigued all the researchers. Some scholars saw it as an amphitheater, others as an agora or even a fort. And in any case, the dating of the Combe was not in doubt, and all the scholars attributed it to a late period, Hellenistic or Roman, and even later. Yet, it has long been noted that Plintine, or rather the Gulf of Plintine, appeared in Greek sources as early as the 5th century BC, by Herodotus, and then by the Pseudo-Syllax during the 4th century BC. Elanikos, a forgotten scholar of the 5th century BC, quoted by Athenaeus of Naucratis, claimed that the viticulture had been invented in Plantine. Historians probably did not fully understand the importance of this sentence, which has been partly confirmed by archaeology. And indeed, the site of Comenus is occupied long before Alexander's conquest, more precisely from the New Kingdom onward. The oldest artifact found at Plantine is a jar handle stamped with the name of Melitaton, the daughter of Akhenaton, who succeeded him on the throne upon his death. The stamped jar, that is here at the top, along with a set of shards dated to the 18th dynasty, was found near Klins during a survey to the west of the Combe. They are of local manufacture and were intended to contain wine. The following artifacts were found in the foundation of a building constructed in the center of the Combe in the Greco-Roman period. They date to the 19th century dynasty, and include 10 blocks from a temple dated to the reign of Ramesses II, according to the cartouche inscribed on several of them. Besides, 8 blocks were found and belonging from contemporary private monuments. All these blocks are made of local stone blocks and the temple of Ramesses II, as well as the private monuments that must have been placed around it, are undoubtedly from the site of Plantine itself. Finally, very recently, in June, last June, the team that oversees the excavation of the center of the Combe reached very interesting layers in situ above the bedrock. They probably belong to a dump connected to an occupation nearby. In these muddy layers, they have found some 17 shards belonging to an imported vase identified by Widote as an Aegean large transport stirrup jar of probable Cretan origin, together with Canaan jars. The context is likely dated to the early Ramesside period, which gives us another proof of an occupation of the site at that time. For the moment, the nature of this settlement dated to the New Kingdom is not known, because the trenches carried out are not large enough to have a good overview of the remains. However, our excavations show that the shape of the comb, with these levees around a center, a low center, is of human origin, and it predates the oldest levels excavated by us on the levees, which date back to the 10th and 9th century BC. So there is every reason to believe that the occupation of the New Kingdom gave this shape to our site. The stamped jar of Meritaton suggests the existence of a royal vineyard at Plantine, as many of them developed from the beginning of the Pharaonic period in the Egyptian margin regions, and particularly in the Arpunum, which includes the region of Lake Noret. Claire Somaglino and Sylvain Lenin, who are in charge of the study of the remains of this period, also proposed to place the foundation or the enlargement of Plantine, which is materialized by the construction of the temple by Ramesses II, in the policy of this pharaoh of securing the accesses to Egypt in front of the Libyan groups that emerged at that time. It is interesting to stress that a fortress was built during the same reign on the coastal site of Zawiyat Manhattan, some 300 kilometers west of Plantine on the Libyan front. One of the blocks mentioned above that was found in Plantine comes from a stela dedicated by the troop leader and garrison director Paeri de Pejet, which attests to the presence of soldiers at Plantine. The immortal pottery of Comenius finds good parallel in Zawiyat Menrakan, and the two sites are also probably inserted in the same trade network. To sum up, whether the settlement of Plantine was a settlement dedicated to the production of wine, a port of trade, or even a fortress is not established, but the evidence is certainly strong in favor of a settlement founded by the Egyptian power to meet several objectives, as it was often the case in the pioneer fronts of the Egyptian margins. After a period of occupation during the third intermediate period that is now proven in the site but still poorly known, the next sequence of occupation in the Com goes from the beginning of the site period, in the middle of the 7th century BC, to the beginning of the first Persian domination in Egypt, beginning of or middle of the 5th century BC. The settlement of Plantine is then inhabited by a community whose material culture indicates without any doubt that they are Egyptians, as attested by the numerous fragments of, for example, New Year flasks and also amulets represented jet eyes, or also deities in the like Sobek, Isis, Saturns, or Anubis. The activities of the inhabitants were focused on the exploitation of local resources, the most important of which was, again, the vine. The production of wine seems to have been the raison d'être of the town, as is shown by the overwhelming presence of grape seeds found in several thousand copies in the archaeobotanical assemblage studied by our team of archaeobotanists. These seeds are found in all the sectors excavated by our teams, whether they are a modest residential area or more complex area that I will present to you in a minute. In sector 2 and 8, to the south of the Com, viticulture appears indirectly. It is a district situated a little bit outside of the Com. It is densely occupied and constantly rebuilt during the 2.5 centuries of its occupation. If we have a look at one of the well-preserved house dated to the phase 4, you can have a good idea of the kind of remains you can see here. This house is dated to the 5th century BC. It has 4 rooms on the ground floor, as well as a second floor, as indicated by the presence of a staircase. The rooms were used for living and weaving, as shown by the roomways found under the staircase and carefully stored. Outside, 2 courtyards were equipped with were set with equipment for culinary preparation, silos, fireplaces. According to the artifacts found there, composed of domestic and very common materials, the inhabitants of the district lived from fishing. As you can see, we have found a hook and also pumice stones that were used for fishing. And the marine fauna is quite present in the faunal assemblage. They had also agricultural activities, as shown by the found of crew heads in a cellar. And it is highly probable that some of them, of these inhabitants, were working in the vineyards that surrounded the village. This is evidenced by the residues of the fireplaces in which the food of these inhabitants was cooked, that yielded lots, thousands, hundreds of vine remains, pips, and perhaps press rejects. In the second area, the viticulture activity left even more striking evidence. We have indeed discovered a real winery dated to the 7th century BC. It is to date one of the 2 wine production units ever discovered in Egypt. The other example was uncovered by Dr. Pitot at Tel El Daba, but the Plantin winery is far more spectacular in its construction and preservation. I will limit myself to the main point about this fantastic discovery and show you some pictures to show you also the very good level of preservation of this monument. The crusher is built in a vaulted room with mud brick walls. It stands at the back of the room and is built of very finely cut local limestone. It consists of a treading platform where at least 400 liters of grape must could be produced per round of pressing, and a monolithic vat, the lower part. It is very similar in its functioning to a type of crusher that appeared in the New Kingdom and that is represented in the Theban tombs of Antef, Nacht, or Uzerhat. Reconstruction made by Paul François. And here are the parallels. Near this room, a small storage room with a floor level lower than the external level circulation open to the south. The jar could be stored here on several levels, as indicated in the representation, for example, in the Theban tube TT 155. But the cellar was not large enough to store the production of the winery, and other storerooms are likely to be found in the vicinity or elsewhere on the site. Next to the winery, a large multi-story building dominated the area. It was built at the same time, but it survived after the abandonment of the winery, which occurred quickly after its construction, most probably due to a landslide or even an earthquake. However, this abandonment does not mean that wine production has stopped, as it is shown by the hundreds and even thousands of pips found in the samples taken from the dump located to the south of the house and that is dated to the 6th century BC. So other wineries which took over after the abandonment of this one are certainly still buried under the ground. The material that was discovered in this area is typical of a domestic area. Weaving was practiced here, as shown by the numerous weights and weaving tools found in one of the cellars of the house. However, some artifacts also demonstrate a certain economic power. We have found a lot of fine imported tableware, but also base for perfume, bronze weights, etc. This is also obvious if we compare the faunal assemblage provided by these 2 districts, as Nicolas Morand has recently done. If you study the domestic triad, so the bovids, the ovicaprines, and the pigs, you can see a clear difference in the proportion of pigs and goats between sector 6 and sector 8. In ancient Egypt, pork is often eaten by the poorer population, which seems to be the case of the inhabitants of sector 8. In the dump of sector 6, where the winery was built, the material is richer and more varied, and goats are in the majority, and the beef is also more important. These two trenches, sector 2, 8, and sector 6, open on the same Persian agglomeration, limited as they are in surface, highlight the intensity but also the composite nature of the site's occupation, both in terms of activities, social status, and economic base of the inhabitants. In view of the importance of viticulture and the activity of the community living there, the settlement may still have been part of a large wine estate, like it was probably the case in the New Kingdom. The beneficiary could have been the pharaoh, indeed, 2 wine jars bearing a stamp with the name of the pharaoh Nekao II, who are found in sector 6 and 8. After a period of abandonment or maybe retractation of the occupation between the second half of the 5th century BC and the end of the 1st century BC, the site of Cantine was reoccupied at the beginning of the Ptolemaic period. The necropolis started to be used at the end of the 4th century BC or very beginning of the 3rd century BC, meaning very soon after Alexander's conquest and the foundation of the new capital, Alexandria, on the Mediterranean coast. A few decades later, a winery was built next to the necropolis. It has been recently excavated by Pitot, following an initial architecture study by Unique. It is equipped with a grape grinder and a cellar, and is entirely dedicated to wine production. It must have been located in the middle of the vineyards. A press was added during the second phase of operation of the winery to speed up production. Also, the later is difficult to estimate. Calculation made recently with my colleague Paul François have led me to suppose that the production could be equivalent to more than 4 cubic meters of wine. This is equivalent to the filling of about 1,300 amphora and to a cultivated area of more than 18 hectares. These figures are obviously orders of magnitude, and they are probably overestimated. But they are very close to the production capacities of some Hellenistic wineries of the Black Sea, Asia Minor, and Greece, and some of the most important vineyards mentioned in the papyrus. This establishment is exceptional by its very early date, since it seems to have been built as early as the first half of the 3rd century BC. The wine of the Alexandrian hinterland will be famous at the beginning of the Roman period, as attested by many mentioned by the Latin poets of that time. But we can see with this example that the wine of the Tenia, the most famous wine according to Egyptian wine, according to Athenaeus of Naucratis, was produced from the first decades of the Ptolemaic domination in Egypt. I will come back to the significance of this discovery after having presented some other remains of planting that can be attributed to the Ptolemaic period. On the com, we have noted first the construction at the turn of the 4th century BC and 3rd century BC in sector 2 of a wall in mud brick that could have been part of an enclosure wall built entirely in this material. This first wall was replaced by a sandstone enclosure during the 2nd century BC, which can be followed on all ridges of the com. The foundation excavated in sector 2 is about 5 meters high. The wall that was supported by this foundation must have been at least as great, which gives you an idea of the massive aspect of the enclosure wall at that time. The construction of a large building in the center of the com probably dates from one of these two construction periods in the Ptolemaic period. This is the in right, and this is the center of the com. Here we have found what was probably a temple composed of a dromos and a monument of 20 meters by 34 meters in the center that was almost entirely dismantled in the Roman period. So this is quite a little bit difficult to figure out what it was looking like, but it is here. We have the foundation. The fact that this building was has the same orientation with the Hellenistic structure of the com and the lower town, as well as the proportions of the monuments, and also the discovery of some of capitals and also two fragments of Greek inscriptions suggest that it could be dated to the Hellenistic period. The enclosure could then be interpreted as a temenos intended to enclose the sanctuary. The presence of a temple of relatively large dimension for a small establishment such as 19 is noteworthy. But unfortunately, the dismantling of the building in the Roman period makes it difficult for the moment to know, to attribute it to a deity. But we have had this is the dromos and the dismantled temple. And in 2021, we had the good surprise to discover another building that is probably dated to the same period of construction, which could be a secondary temple to the left of the picture. It is visibly better preserved, and its exploration will allow us to refine our knowledge on the whole complex. Here you can see it to the left. Apart from the temple and its enclosure, the remains of the Ptolemaic are very scarce on the com. Most of the settlement was established south of the com in a village that developed on the southern slope of the Tenon. However, apart from quick test pits, the village had not been explored extensively yet. This is why last June, this is some previous work that has been done before this year. In last June, we opened a large exploration program to the southeast of the village in order to characterize the occupation in this area. I chose to first excavate a large building with an open courtyard in the center and several rooms arranged along three sides. It is very similar to another building that is known in the Alexandrian area, and that is probably a farm. Our aims were to evaluate the state of preservation of the remains, to date the occupation of the building, and to find out if a previous occupation took place under the Ptolemaic village. I will not insist too much on the results, but because for the moment the surface is very, very limited, but the remains, as you can see here, are well preserved, and the material is rich and shown to be dated to the 3rd and 2nd century BC. Thanks to the data we already have on the Ptolemaic occupation of the site, we can consider with certainty that the community that occupied Plantin at the beginning of the Hellenistic period was of Greek origin. There are many direct and indirect indications. First, there are some very rare names in the necropolis on stelas that are Greek, including a certain Niketas, son of Diotimos, coming from Asia Minor. The necropolis has Greco-Macedonian characteristics, and the hypogea in particular are perfectly in line with the Alexandrian type that developed at that time. The objects accompanying the deceased in their graves are also typically Greek, as you can see on the picture to the right. And the presence of cremations leave no doubts as to the cultural identity of the deceased. Finally, the remains of the com, the village, and the surroundings of the necropolis are also of Greek tradition, including the winery. The installation of these Greco-Macedonian settlers took place quite quickly after the conquest, probably in a planned manner. We know that the Ptolemies used to settle the Greeks in the countryside through three main means. By allowing dorea, or vast domains, to the elite of the kingdom, by granting plots of land or clerichy to soldiers of the Ptolemaic army in the Egyptian countryside, and by establishing garrisons. To accommodate these new inhabitants, the Ptolemies often settled the new populations in already existing urban centers, but they also founded some settlements ex nihilo. At Plantin, for the moment, nothing allows us to decide with certainty among these three possibilities. The hypothesis of a garrison seems to us the last likely as it stands. On the other hand, a foundation ex nihilo to accommodate clerics is quite possible, and the profile of Diotimos, son of Niketas, from Asian Minor, for example, fits well with this conjecture. The hypothesis of a vast domain, a dorea, is also not totally excluded when we know that large domains of that kind were attributed by Ptolemy II in the region of Alexandria and the Lake Marinus. It is thought, for example, that Apollonius himself, the Ministry of Economy of Ptolemy II, had some dorea, some large estates in these places, and they are mentioned here in two papyri. As you can see, in these domains, one grew vines that were then shipped to the Fayum in large numbers. In this context, the discovery of the winery near the necropolis takes on a special significance. Some conclusion. After 10 years of excavation by the French mission of Taposiris Magna and Plantin at Comenubus, the Egyptian toponym of the site, unfortunately, still eludes us. But the identification of the locality with Plantine, the Greek toponym, on the other hand, comes out stronger, and several elements give even more weight to the long-proposed identification. This is the case, first of all, with the fact that the place name, or a derivative of the toponym, is mentioned before the Hellenistic period by three separated authors. Excavations have proved that the site existed long before the conquest, which explains these early mentions. The toponym of Plintine in Greek means the mud brick building or the mud brick site, and it refers to mud brick and clay, and applied particularly well to the site of Comenubus. Most of the buildings of the site are made of these sandy yellow mud bricks. The fact that the site gave its name to a gulf, and that only this gulf is mentioned in Greek sources, means that it served the Greek sailors as a topographical reference during their approaches to the Egyptian coasts, which were known to be very difficult to approach. It is likely that the yellow color of the comb contrasted very well with the white color of the calcarenite and the blue color of the sea. And the size of the comb, which is 11 meters high today, but was probably some more meters in the side period at least, may be particularly useful as a landmark. The importance of viticulture on the site is in accordance with the testimony of Hellanicus. The antiquity of cultivation of the vine in Plantin and the intensity of production at all times have certainly marked the Greeks, who consequently made it one of the places where the vine and its culture were very much. The persistence of viticulture on the same site over more than a millennium is striking, even if there have undoubtedly been changes in the technique, of course, and the great varieties cultivated here. Probably the qualities of the terroir around the village were known and identified by the Egyptians as early as the New Kingdom. This leads to the question of the transmission of the knowledge. How did the Greco-Macedonian people who have landed in Egypt following Alexander's conquest know about the quality of the land of Plantin? In other words, did the Greeks, who knew Plantin as a landmark, visit the village before the conquest? And or were there Egyptians on the site when the Greeks arrived in the 4th and 3rd century BC? It is partly to answer these questions that the next field campaign will be carried out at Plantin by our great team, which are here, whose member I would like to thank you. Thank you very much.
Merci, Bérangère. Thank you very much, Bérangère. And we have a quarter of time for some questions. And I have first one question about the stamped handles, which are, of course, very interesting for me. There's also other stamped handles which were found at Tel Borj. I think there's one which was found in the south of Palestine by Tel Hajjur. My first feeling was it was linked to the garrisons here, because we know that there were some garrisons by the late 80s dynasty. But I have never thought that it was directly linked to the production of wines. And so here you open a door to this aspect, which is very interesting. What should be interesting, of course, is to test the fabrics of the pottery there, and to see if we have the same clay in Tel Borj elsewhere. So is there something
yes.
to do?
Obviously, this is what we would like to do. It is important to stress that the stamp that was found in Plantin is of local manufacture, so it's a local clay. It's for sure with but it was only tested by the visually, but now analysis, and that's
Okay, great.
Thanks for the interesting lecture. I just have a question. If you have any... Thank you for the interesting lecture. I just have a question. If you ever found any hieroglyphic text there, because you didn't show from this era or other text week.
so we have found some blocks of the Ramesside period. I've shown some, of them, and they probably belong to a temple that was dismantled to build the Hellenistic temple that was then dismantled in the Roman period. So this is a little bit complicated to excavate, but we have found like 15 blocks of Pharaonic period with inscriptions. And we have found also some ostraca. This year we have found an ostracon that is probably in Demotic, dated to the same period. And in the Ptolemaic layers, we have found some fragments, but very small fragments, unfortunately, in Greek, coming probably from the sanctuary. It is in marble, and it looks like it mentioned a temple, a propylaeon. Yeah, so, but this is on the only inscription.
The site that we see on the north coast on the left-hand side, is it?
Yes.
But is it a bit further, or just the one on the left that is white? You can see from the wood. It's further to the desert a little bit.
It's 40 kilometers west to Alexandria, and it's near the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah.
Between the Mediterranean Sea and the Lake Marius. Yeah. So, and the environment is a desertic, semi-desertic.
Thank you so much.
So, any other questions?
I have a question about the second phase of the settlement, so the 7th century BC. You have said that the population was Egyptian, purely Egyptian. Was there any traces of some Levantine influence connection besides the loom weights, or is there anything else?
No, it's for sure an Egyptian village, and all the artifacts are from the Egyptian sphere. But what I did not have the time to show you, but half of the pottery is from Greek origin, or Greek or Phoenician origin. So it means that the site was also very open to the Mediterranean at that time. We have the hypothesis that the site has had a harbor on the sea. That would explain all this importation in maybe the New Kingdom. I have shown these Scandinavian jars and the Cretan jar. But for the moment, it has been impossible to make any survey in the sea, because there's a lot of recent villages, recent and modern construction in that part of Egypt. So, but it's an hypothesis, and it's a very good hypothesis, because we have so many importation. Like half of the pottery planting is from outside of Egypt.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
One question related to the ceramics, because I think you already found one small piece of ceramic that cannot be identified as Egyptian, neither as Mediterranean. So I was wondering if since then, if you found any other ceramics that you cannot identify.
No, for the moment, it's the only one. We would like very much to find the others, of course, because they could be Libyan origin or local origin, because of course this area was also, it was Egyptian, it was a part of the Egyptian territory, but we know that there was some nomadic population in the area. So this would be very interesting to find other shells, but for the moment, no, we only find this one.
Okay, thank you. And just one small question. If there are any mentions of natron or alum or any products that traveled from Sahara?
No. Thank you. It's wine.
Thank you.
No more questions? So I think everybody wants to eat. Time for lunch. So I just recall you that this afternoon the lecture will be at the University Paul Valéry at Saint-Charles site with 3 different sessions. In session 1, magic, religion, and mythology in the auditorium. Session 2, Egypt and the Mediterranean in the Salle des Colloques 1, and session 3, Karnak in Salle des Colloques 2. And the session will start at 2:30 p.m.